My name is Amy Sullivan, and I'm the Resource Services Librarian here, and I welcome you to the library and to our event today. Afterwards, if you have any questions about the library while you're here, please feel free to ask me or one of our staff members. We're glad to assist you. We actually have Barry Craig's books here for checkout, but also after our presentation, he will be selling and signing some books. The books that he has available today, he has one copy left of Hidden History of Western Kentucky. And then he has many copies of Hidden History of Kentucky and the Civil War, and that is the book that he is going to be discussing, our soldier today, discussing his life and his role in the Civil War, and that's in that book. The True Tales of Old-Time Kentucky Politics, and the Hidden History of Kentucky Soldiers. So those will be available after our presentation today. We also have plenty of refreshments. We tried to go along with the theme of the Civil War and serve some things that they actually did. We did some research, and potato soup was a big thing during the Civil War, and cornbread. We have that, and cheesecake. So please feel free, and lemonade, coffee, water. Please help yourself during the presentation or afterwards. Stick around and enjoy. It is my pleasure today to welcome Mr. Barry Craig. As you know, he has been a part of the college at West Kentucky Community and Technical College for many years, 24 to be exact, and in May he is going to be retiring officially. So we are going to miss him, but I've heard that he may still stick around some and keep his face around, so we're glad. But it is my pleasure to welcome Barry Craig today.
Thank you. Let me say a couple of things about my books. First, we're selling them to raise money for scholarships here, and we've raised over $6,000 so far. If you wish to purchase them, there they are, and I will make you the same offer I always make people, and that is I will autograph it or not, depending on if you think it will decrease the yard sale value. You've always got to be thinking ahead. I'm going to thank my good friend David Nickel for this, because he gave me the idea for this story, which I incorporated in my book. It's a remarkable story, and again, at the end, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have about it. Andrew Jackson Smith saw the color bearer die with Old Glory in his grasp. A 21-year-old Kentuckian who escaped slavery to fight for his freedom, Smith grabbed the battle flag. Waving the stars and stripes over his head, he helped rally his comrades against the rebel foe. Smith's bravery in the Civil War earned him the Medal of Honor, but not until 2001, more than 136 years after his feat of extraordinary valor in the face of deadly enemy fire. 17 African Americans won the Medal of Honor in the Civil War. Smith was the only one from the Bluegrass State. A Kentucky Historical Society marker in the land between the lakes near Grand Rivers honors this Medal of Honor recipient, born a slave in Lyon County, Kentucky on September the 3rd, 1843. Smith died at the age of 88 in nearby Grand Rivers. He is buried in the Mount Pleasant Cemetery on the hilltop above the marker. Between the Rivers Incorporated, whose charter members include my good friend Professor David Nickel, got the marker erected next to the trace, the main LBL highway. The stretch of blacktop was renamed the Andrew Jackson Smith Memorial Highway, thanks to this local nonprofit group, which also helped arrange a special Medal of Honor tombstone for the soldier. The old cemetery, ramrod straight cedar trees, shade the grave of this soldier, Mount Pleasant Cemetery. How many of you all have seen it? Know where it is? Yeah, it's right on the trace. Go right past the trace there. It is a standard military tombstone, white, granite. His is different. It says Medal of Honor on it. There's a gold Medal of Honor star on this tombstone. The late Ray Parrish, a good friend of David's, and I was fortunate to know Mr. Parrish a little bit. He was president of the Between the Rivers organization, got the stone through the Veterans Administration. Now, a surgeon who served with him nominated him for the Medal of Honor in 1916. The Army rejected the nomination, citing a lack of evidence racism was likely a factor as well, according to the office of U.S. Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois. Now, Senator Durbin and now retired U.S. Representative Tom Ewing, also from Illinois, teamed up with other government officials and a professor at Illinois State University to get this award to him. Now, the story of Andrew Jackson Smith, and by the way, a book is being written on him right now by this historian. In fact, she's contacted David about it. Early in the war, Andrew Jackson Smith and another slave decided to enlist in the Union Army after they learned that their masters were going to join the Confederate Army and take them along. Now, Lyon County leaned toward the south, like most western Kentucky counties, particularly those in the Jackson Purchase. The Purchase was the Bluegrass State's only pro-Confederate region. Now, the closest federal troops to Smith and his companion were in Smithland, which is about 25 miles from where he lived in Lyon County. Now, the Union Army showed up in Smithland in September of 1861. The Civil War had begun in April of 1861. Now, Southern political leaders had feared that the election of Abraham Lincoln as president would doom slavery. They were convinced that Lincoln and the Republican Party, which had been founded in 1854 on anti-slavery principles, would soon move to abolish their peculiar institution. In December of 1860, South Carolina seceded and invited the 14 other slave states to, quote, join us in forming a confederacy of slave-holding states. 6 more slave states seceded in early 1861, forming the Confederate States of America. Their president was Jefferson Davis of Mississippi, born in Kentucky, as was Abraham Lincoln. Guides in the state capitol are tremendously surprised when visitors visit. If you visit our state capitol in the rotunda, you've seen the statue of Abraham Lincoln, beautiful statue of Abraham Lincoln. And the guides tell me that visitors are astonished when they tell them how many votes Lincoln got in Kentucky in 1860. There are 2 totals. I'm going to give you the greater total. 1,366 votes, less than 1% of all votes cast. No president was more unpopular in his home state while he was in office than Abraham Lincoln. When he ran for election in 1864, he lost Kentucky again. His total was about 20,000, but that's probably because he ran on the Union ticket and not the Republican ticket. It's an amazing thing. Long after Lincoln died, that statue was elected. Now, what was Kentucky to do in the Civil War? Lincoln supposedly said, I hope to have God on my side, but I must have Kentucky. He may not have said that, but the sentiment certainly was his. Kentucky was a slave state, had been a slave state since 1792, but Kentucky always put the Union first. And that was largely because of the influence of Kentucky's greatest statesman, Henry Clay. Clay always put the Union first. The Union must be preserved. And Clay, if you studied history, you know, was the author of 3 compromises to save the Union. And Kentuckians were really steeped in the tradition of Henry Clay. Now, it's very important to note that almost every white Kentuckian supported slavery, even Unionists. And I can read to you editorials from the Louisville Journal, the state's leading Unionist newspaper. I can read you letters and documents from these Unionists. And their argument was this: the South is going to lose the war, and they're going to lose their slaves. If we stay in the Union, they'll let us keep our slaves because we fought for the Union. It's a fact not well known among Kentuckians. The secessionists argued just the opposite. The only way to preserve slavery is to secede, to join the other slave states in the Confederacy. Did Kentucky secede? It did not. It did not. There was a group of minority secessionists who gathered in Russellville in the autumn of 1861 and established a rump government. It was completely extra legal, did not represent majority opinion except in one place, and that was the Jackson Purchase. That'd make an interesting book, don't you think? The Jackson Purchase in the Civil War. Possibility there. From the University Press of Kentucky, coming out in 2014. Still working on that one. One thing I did learn: it's better to take a sabbatical when you do this. My manuscript has run to 500 plus pages, and I'm still working on it. But it's a labor of love, enjoying it thoroughly. In April of 1861, the Civil War began. After the Confederates fired on Fort Sumter in Charleston, South Carolina, 4 more slave states joined the Union. They were Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Arkansas. Virginia is especially significant to Kentucky. Who is our mother state? Virginia is. Virginia is. Kentucky's governor, Beriah McGoffin. We've always had some interesting names for governors. Beriah McGoffin. I can top that one. Ruby LaFoon. That's a man. Talk about him some other time. He was a Southern sympathizer, a staunch supporter of slavery. And when President Lincoln called upon Kentucky to furnish volunteers for the Union forces, he very, very rudely told the president no. Now, when the Confederates asked him, he politely refused. Now, Kentuckians by nature are fighters. There has never been a war that Kentuckians weren't heavily involved in. War of 1812, the Western campaigns, largely Kentuckian. Mexican-American War, lots of Kentuckians volunteered. Kentuckians like to fight. But Kentuckians were hesitant to draw the blood of their fellow Americans, North and South. A lot of Kentuckians, they came through that Cumberland Gap, came down the Ohio River, and then they went north and they went south. The Davis and Lincoln families are perfect examples. The Lincolns went north to Indiana and Illinois. The Davises went south to Mississippi. There's an incredible statistic I have somewhere, how many native Kentuckians were governors and senators and representatives from other states. It's an astonishing number. Southern Illinois. Ever been to West Frankfort, Illinois? It's named for our Frankfort. Eddyville, Illinois, named for our Eddyville. Elizabethtown, Illinois is the seat of Hardin County. Elizabethtown, Kentucky is the seat of Hardin County. A lot of Kentuckians went both ways. And so Kentuckians themselves, though fighters, were hesitant to go to war. And so Kentucky declared itself to be neutral in May of 1861. And textbooks don't stress this enough. This is neutrality within the Union. The United States flag never came down across Kentucky. Kentucky was neutral only in terms of the war effort. Abraham Lincoln was a very skillful politician, and if you've seen the movie about Lincoln, you certainly know that. Lincoln knew in his heart of hearts that the longer Kentucky remained in the Union, the less the likelihood Kentucky would be to go out. And so he left Kentucky alone to find its own way. Now, a president who was perhaps a little less moderate, I don't know about you, but if I were the President of the United States and a governor refused my request for troops, I might send in troops myself. Had he done that, he would have pushed Kentucky possibly into the Confederacy. So Lincoln left Kentucky alone to sort this out. And throughout that summer and throughout that summer of 1861, Unionism grew in Kentucky, everywhere across the state except the Jackson Purchase. Purchase, by the way, was called the South Carolina of Kentucky for its southern sentiment. So again, August of 1861, state legislative elections, free elections, no troops were in this state, overwhelmingly the Unionists win a majority. They enhanced their majority in the legislature. 76 Unionists against 24 secessionists in the Senate, including holdovers. The Unionist majority is 27 to 11. So the people of Kentucky spoke loudly and clearly. Before any army was here, they chose to stay with the Union. After September of 1861, neutrality is shattered. I know some of you know this. The Confederates seized Hickman and Columbus, much to the joy of the populace there. Union forces took Paducah and Smithland, much to the disappointment of most of the populace there. One of my favorite quotes about this, when Grant came to Paducah, a lot of newspaper reporters were with him, including a reporter for the St. Louis Republican. Grant issued an occupation proclamation to the city of Paducah. He said, "I have come to you as your friend and protector." And this reporter wrote, and I quote, "The citizens didn't seem to appreciate the favor." Thought that was rather well put there. So the war has come to Kentucky. The Kentucky legislature then declares forthrightly for the Union, begins to recruit troops to preserve the Union, begins to crack down on Confederate sympathizers as traitors, and so the war is on. Well, Smith and his companion left on a winter night in 1862, traveling at night to avoid detection. They reached the Smithland position, and they waited until daylight to show themselves for obvious reasons. That could be rebel soldiers out there in the dark. So they waited till the sun came up and then presented themselves. They were welcomed into the camp, provided food and shelter and warm clothing, dry clothing, but they were not permitted to enlist. At this point, slaves were not permitted to enlist in the federal forces. Now, we don't know what became of Smith's companion, but Smith himself volunteered as a servant to the commander of the 41st Illinois Infantry, Major John Warner. And Smith agreed to return Warner's belongings to Clinton, Illinois, his hometown, should the officer be killed. He accompanied Major Warner to Fort Henry, to the Battle of Fort Donelson, and on down to Shiloh. Major Warner had 2 horses shot dead from under him in the Battle of Shiloh. He rode back into combat on a Confederate horse that Smith had managed to capture. Now, minutes later, Smith suffered a head wound that would have been otherwise fatal. It was a spent rifle bullet. By the time it reached him, it had lost its velocity. The bullet struck him in the temple, and instead of going into his brain, it came around this way and stuck here between his skin and his skull, this protruding ball. Had it not been spent, it would have killed him. Surgeons removed the bullet, and he recuperated in Warner's hometown. And this is when he heard about the Emancipation Proclamation, which a lot of Americans don't know what this thing did. What the Emancipation Proclamation did is put slavery on the road to extinction. It did not end slavery immediately. It freed slaves only in Confederate-held territory after January the 1st, 1863. So I asked my students, did the Emancipation Proclamation apply to Kentucky? It did not, nor did it apply to Confederate territory under federal control. But the Emancipation Proclamation changes the nature of the Civil War. Before he issued the Emancipation Proclamation, Lincoln said the paramount object of this war is to preserve the Union. After the Emancipation Proclamation, it is also to end slavery. And now it is possible for African Americans to enlist in the federal forces. Though the Emancipation Proclamation did not affect Kentucky, almost every white Kentuckian exploded with fury over this, outrage, anger. Several officers in Kentucky regiments they resigned their commissions over this. Lincoln was vilified for this in the press. He was vilified in our legislature for this. Kentuckians were even more furious when Lincoln permitted the enlistment of African Americans into the federal forces. Kentuckians were aghast at this. White Kentuckians of all political persuasions hated this, hated him for doing this. Now, Kentucky furnished 23,703 African Americans to the federal forces, more than any state except Louisiana. Almost 76,000 Kentuckians donned Union blue. You wouldn't know that from traveling Kentucky, would you? You see Confederate monuments everywhere. You don't see many Union monuments. There's only one. It's in Lewis County. Remember where Lewis County is? Northeastern Kentucky. That's the only Union monument in Kentucky. There's one in Butler County, which isn't far from here, that's to both sides. Now, Confederate totals are less precise, but our textbook, which is an outstanding history book, if you want to look at a great Kentucky history book, it's called A New History of Kentucky by Lowell Harrison and Jim Clotter. Professor Harrison taught history at Western for years. He's dead. God rest his soul. Jim Clotter is our state historian. He teaches at Georgetown, there in Georgetown, Kentucky. Excellent, excellent book. I tell my students, this doesn't read like a textbook, does it? No, it's not a textbook. It's a general history of Kentucky. It's a tremendous book. They put the number between 25,000 and 40,000, and that's pretty accurate. Now, if you want to compare and contrast the purchase, approximately between 5,000 and 6,000 Confederates and about 500 Union troops. So it's a quite different. Makes a good book, don't you think? I hope so. I really hope so. Well, Smith now will travel to Boston, and he will muster in to the 55th Massachusetts Colored Infantry. It is a sister regiment to the 54th Massachusetts, which was featured in the popular movie Glory, which I'm sure you saw. African American troops in the Civil War were designated as USCT, United States Colored Troops. Now, Smith wound up fighting along the Georgia and South Carolina coast. The 54th and 55th Regiment were part of a Union force that attacked Honey Hill, South Carolina on the 30th of November, 1864. Rebel fire killed and wounded, quote, half of the officers and a third of the enlisted men. Now let that soak in. Half of the officers and a third of the enlisted men are killed or wounded. If you've had in my class, you know, what's the bloodiest war America ever fought? It's the Civil War. 618,000 killed or died of wounds or disease. A horrible death toll. You add up all our wars from the Revolutionary War up through Vietnam, it doesn't equal 618,000. People think it's World War II. No, it's not. It's the Civil War. 618,000 Americans at least perished in this conflict. When shrapnel claimed the life of the sergeant carrying the 55th battle flag, Smith, quote, took the regimental colors through heavy artillery fire. The most honored position in a regiment in the Civil War is a color sergeant, the man who carries the flag. Is it the most dangerous job? You bet. Now, it's not just pride here, it is actually communication. Now, in the Civil War, there is no electronic communication. And a Civil War battle, once it begins, becomes so smoky, you can't see your hand in front of your face. You see these wonderful Currier knives and Kurtz and Allison Prince's Civil War battles, all nice and clear. Try to imagine fighting inside a frosted light bulb. That's more accurate. So when your regiment advances, you look at that flag. You keep your eye on that flag. When that flag goes forward, you go forward. When that flag comes back, you go back. And that's why that flag, the color sergeant, is the one who is a target. Down at Shiloh in the National Cemetery, there's a grave of 6 men from Wisconsin who were color bearers, color sergeants, shot down one after another, and somebody would pick up the flag knowing that in doing so, death was quite possible. Now the citation continues. Corporal Smith continued to expose himself to enemy fire by carrying the colors throughout the battle. Through his actions, the regimental colors of the 55th Infantry Regiment were not lost to the enemy. Corporal Andrew Smith's extraordinary valor in the face of deadly enemy fire is in keeping with the highest tradition of military service and reflects great credit upon him, the 55th Regiment, and the United States Army. Now, he didn't just rescue the Stars and Stripes. Civil War regiments also had regimental flags. It's a Union regimental flag is a blue flag with the American eagle on it. He also rescued that. When the sergeant carrying it was wounded, he picked that flag up off as well. Now, what did he get for his bravery? He was promoted to sergeant. And the photograph that you've seen of him on these posters shows him with his sergeant stripes sewn on. He survived the war. He returned to western Kentucky, bought land in Lyon County, and bought land in Grand Rivers, which was just across the line from Lyon County, and became a farmer. He lived his last years in Grand Rivers, which you all know is a Kentucky lake resort. So, how did this man wind up getting the Medal of Honor? Well, the first person to get the ball rolling here was his grandson, Andrew Smith Bowman of Indianapolis. I had the privilege of talking to Mr. Bowman on the phone. And he has decided he would do the research and get this Medal of Honor. He spent years collecting records, conducting research. He worked closely with Senator Durbin, Congressman Ewing, other government officials, and the history professor at Illinois State. In early 2001, he was invited to the White House to receive the Medal of Honor on behalf of his ancestor. He received it from President Bill Clinton in a White House ceremony. Also present was Caruth Smith Washington of Las Vegas, Andrew Jackson Smith's daughter. Now you got to wonder how that happened. Well, I have had the privilege in my career as a reporter years ago of interviewing the son of a Confederate veteran and the sons and daughters of a Union veteran. This was in 1982 or 3. Now, how did that happen? Well, what happened was these vets oftentimes remarried late in life. Now, the women who married them, was it for love? Maybe. Or it also could be to get their Civil War pensions, because those were quite, well, relatively generous. In any event, that is how a daughter of a Civil War veteran came to the White House in the year 2001. Senator Durbin called this belated award a wrong righted. So the next time you're traveling through Land Between the Lakes, down the Trace, and you see that sign, it's worth pulling in and seeing that tomb. It's a remarkable story. I think it's a good example of how an individual and a group can accomplish great things. And certainly Ray Parrish deserves all the credit in the world for this. He died. Before Ray died, David was able to give him a copy of my book with him in there. So you can do this as an individual. You can do great things like that. Any questions that you all have? I'll be happy to answer. Yes, sir.
What was the official U.S. policy on escaped slaves from a state like Kentucky before the emancipation?
Excellent question. There wasn't one. It depended on the officer. Some officers sent them back, some didn't. Now, this caused quite a stir in Missouri when General John C. Fremont, who'd been the Republican nominee for president in 1856, he kept the slaves, and Lincoln countermanded that because Lincoln was, again, a very canny politician. He doesn't want to get the border states to push them out, and the border states that never went out, of course, Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky, and Missouri. The policy wasn't settled until the Emancipation Proclamation. That's a very good question. It depended on the individual officer and the place. Oh, sorry about that.
I guess I would be somewhat surprised that Mr. Smith came back near his home area, because given the sentiment of this area, you would think that an African American who fought for the Union would not be very well received. Did your research find any problems that he had?
I have not researched that part, but David, who is the professor who's writing the book on him?
I forget her name.
Oh, good, I do too. That makes two of us. Anyway, that's going to be covered in that book. I'm not sure. Yes?
Her name is Sharon McDonald.
Sharon McDonald, that's right, because she actually sent me that image of him. Have you talked to her?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. She's going to talk to, that's a remarkable fact. In fact, and that's, again, that's one of the great ironies of Kentucky history, is after the war was over, when these Confederates came back, they became the leaders in Kentucky's government. Governor James McCreary was one of Morgan's officers, Simon Bolivar Buckner. One Republican complained that the rebels are as much in control of Kentucky as if they'd won the war. I tell you a personal experience, he was a tremendous professor at Murray State. His name was Hunter Hancock. He taught biology. And do you know Dr. Hancock?
Yes, sir.
Oh, what a guy. And I told him one time in front of a group, I said, Dr. Hancock, of all the courses I took in my college at Murray State, through graduate school, history courses, yours is the best course I ever had. Field biology, he loved history. Well, Hunter Hancock's grandfather served in the 3rd Kentucky, and that's all he would say. Well, people in this area thought he meant the 3rd Confederate Kentucky infantry. No, he meant the 3rd Kentucky Union Cavalry. He kept that a secret because he wanted to get a loan from the bank. The president of the bank was this ex-rebel officer. But the great story Hunter told me was many years when Hunter was a little boy, his granddad said, Hunter, let's get in the car. I'm going to take you to Shiloh and show you where I was. And I mean, what a guy to tour Shiloh from the 3rd Kentucky Union Cavalry. He was from Henderson, Kentucky. That's a very good question, and I hope that the professor answers that. That's an outstanding question. Yes, sir.
Where exactly was he from in Lyon County?
David, do you know?
Pretty close, within a mile or two, being close to the Starline Works community.
Starline Works.
Being real close to the Prairie Campground, where that is now, right in that area.
She's been doing some pretty extensive research on the route that he would have possibly taken. He and his companion, and David, as a matter of fact, have been helping with that. Any other questions? Well, you all were a good group. None of you went to sleep because I talked too loud anyway. Enjoy that soup, although I must confess that that soup looks a little bit like something in a scene from the movie The Great Santini. Someone knows what I'm talking about. Yes, Professor Wergler knows. If you don't know, to me it's the greatest practical joke I have ever seen. Did you see the movie The Great Santini? Robert Duvall. He's a Marine Corps fighter pilot. If you want to know after the camera's turned off, I'll tell you. But I have always wanted to do that to somebody. And you know, I've still got till May. David, you and I ought to pull that off because we could get away with it. Thank you all for coming. Enjoy the soup.